Inclusion writer, it is the two words that are sweeping across Hollywood right now after Frances McDormand said them in her Oscar acceptance speech. The latest to add inclusion writers to their production company are Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's production company, following the lead of Michael B. Jordan. So, on behalf of Pearl Street Films, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Jennifer Todd, Drew Vinton, and I will be adopting the hashtag inclusion writer for all of our projects moving forward. This was said by Fanchon Cox Giovanni, the head of strategic outreach for Pearl Street, which is the production company for Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. This was announced via Twitter. She also cited Michael B. Jordan in that for just saying, you know, we're following your lead. Thanks for getting this started. Saying this is an important part of the movement sweeping Hollywood. Now, we've talked about this before on the show, but let's just break down what is an inclusion writer so that everyone knows. Simply put, an inclusion writer is an optional contract addition that enforces a specified degree of diversity on a film or television project. Now, the terms for an inclusion writer are very flexible, so we're going to have to see what these mean for productions moving forward. I thought this was particularly interesting for Matt Damon and Ben Affleck to add to the charge, because I remember watching Project Greenlight a couple years back, where Matt Damon had an interesting back and forth about diversity in film. Let's take a look at this clip.
I just would want to urge people to think about whoever this director is, the way that they're going to treat the character of Harmony. Her being a prostitute, the only black person being a hooker who gets hit by her white pimp.
We brought up to each other. So I think on the surface, they look like one thing, but they might end up giving us something that we don't want. And when we're talking about diversity, you do it in the casting of the film, not in the casting of the show.
Whew. Wow, okay.
So to clarify, Project Greenlight, when you say the casting of the show, Project Greenlight is about a movie going into production, sort of what goes on behind the scenes. So when they say the casting of the show, they're talking about the director, who they're bringing on, the producers, all that stuff. So that was really interesting. He got some flack for that. But now just to see how far his company and his thought process on diversity and inclusion has come, because now they will be including inclusion writers for all their forthcoming productions. I think this is really exciting. What's your take on it, Amir?
I think it's a necessary step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I think most people agree that this is a good thing. The people that disagree with it are the people who don't like affirmative action, for instance. And
I think also misunderstanding what an inclusion writer entails.
Right, but I keep going over this. Is this that different from affirmative action?
I have no answer. I simply don't, unfortunately.
Right, I don't think it is that different, and the only difference is that it's optional, and it kind of the nature of it is a little bit different in that, like, it's asking for films to kind of reflect real life diversity,
well, also,
not only in the casting, but also in the crew.
Yeah, well also, you know, an inclusion writer is flexible and the variables will change depending on the production. As I understand, affirmative action was a little bit more concrete.
Yeah.
So I think that's a major difference.
Right.
I think that also, as exciting as this is, the reason why Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's production company, I think, tossed their hat into the ring, is that an expression? I never know what expressions are real.
Sure.
Tossing your hat into the ring, sure. They did this so early on is because there is sort of a mixed to not good perception of Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, because as soon as the Me Too movement started happening, remember Matt Damon was talking about how we shouldn't be talking, why aren't we talking about all the guys that aren't assaulting women? Like he had like a bunch of like wonky statements where like, wait, why, what are you doing here, man? So I think that there was a perception of that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck didn't really understand the immensity of the movement, and they were sort of sometimes diminishing towards it. So this is also a bit of a PR stunt on their behalf, saying that like, hey, we recognize that we have said some things that were a little troubling in the past, so now we're all in on the inclusion writer, which I think is great. I think that that's the way that if you're going to do a PR stunt, let's do it in a positive way to make positive change that shows that you've listened to some of the negative feedback that came their way.
Less talk, more action.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't really exactly know where I stand on this. Like society is telling me like I have to think this is a good thing across the board, and I do really think a part of me feels that way. Another part of me is telling me like quota systems like this, they do come with like their own set of problems. But I don't know if that's me being influenced by like false right-wing talking points, but there is a serious part of me that's just like, maybe so like I need to think about this a little bit more if this is actually gonna help in the long run.
So you're nervous that basically that people will be excluded because of a quota system. And what my understanding is that inclusion writers are so flexible depending on the project, and that it's so much more than just a quota and percentages, and they point that out as well. Like this was from Stacey L. Smith, who is the USC communications professor, who is also the co-creator of Inclusion Writers. She says, quote, "It's not that rigid. It's not like you need to have 4 women for these 20 roles. Rather, we strongly encourage you to build this diverse hiring pool and then look for opportunities to hire highly qualified folks from underrepresented groups in such a way that you're matching the demographics of the world that you're living in."
Yeah.
So when I read that, bearing that in mind, it doesn't sound like a quota system to me, but I understand your hesitations and I understand.
I think part of my hesitation is just comes from my own personal experience as a Middle Eastern man in this country. I don't think I'm considered an underrepresented group in any category. There's no category out there for me, even though I believe through my personal experience, I am affected because I'm not considered white by people who like see my name or they'll see me, but there's no like box for me to check as like a Middle Eastern person. I have to write that I'm white.
So I'm
like
wondering,
I am on paper, I am considered Caucasian or white. So I don't know how this is gonna affect me.
I think, okay, it's an interesting thing to bring up because obviously if you're in the entertainment industry and you're thinking about this, you want to understand how is it gonna affect me. We're all, we like to think that we're all good do-gooders for the greater good, but we do think of our best interest. It's interesting. I think that with inclusion writers being incorporated, we're going to see that is broadened. That because you're obviously I don't know how you're going to take this. You're obviously not white. Mm-hmm. And I know that your Middle Eastern heritage absolutely plays in a role in how people perceive you and your own lived life experience. So I'm thinking that now if Hollywood is having a nod towards diversity and inclusion, that's part of what would need to be included. Because that seems like that seems like something that's such a missed opportunity and such a missed representation of the lived experiences of people working in the industry. So I think this is all going to be part of it. But prior to this, it was such a narrow understanding of what roles people fit into and who are even coming in to be hiring. It kind of reminds me of the Viola Davis speech when she was saying, "You can't win Emmys or Oscars for roles that don't exist."
Yeah.
So what an inclusion writer, what this movement is trying to encompass is just broadening the scope of bringing in people that perhaps you hadn't considered for certain roles or job opportunities before, and you hadn't really questioned why. And I think it all just comes down to that we live in a really diverse world, and we need the demographics of the people working on these projects to match that. So this is a good step in the right direction, but I think it is absolutely important that we keep having tough conversations because a lot of people are still confused about what this means, and you do think of your best interest, like how will this affect me, and
yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I'm glad that we're having these conversations in the first place, and I think it will end up having a profound impact on just people in this country.
Yeah, and
I think the more you see it's gonna have an effect.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of tricky and it's awkward to talk about because you feel like no one wants to stand in the way of progress and no one wants to feel like they're doing that or they're being, they have sort of antiquated views or whatever, but it's all part of it. It's all growing pains, and I think this is for the greater good. That's gonna do it for this story.